My son-in-law laughed at my rusty truck. He went pale when he saw where it parked next. My son-in-law mocked my rusty truck in front of his wealthy friends. When he found out what was really under that hood, and who I really was, his face went completely pale, and everything he'd built on arrogance came crashing down. I pulled up to my daughter's new mansion in my 1985 Ford pickup, the same truck I'd been driving for decades. The body was covered in rust spots. The paint had faded to a dull red. One side mirror was held on with duct tape, and the passenger door squeaked every time it opened. But the engine purred like a kitten. That truck had never let me down. Not once in 39 years. Emily's new place was massive, a modern mansion with floor-to-ceiling windows and a circular driveway packed with expensive cars. Mercedes, BMWs, a Porsche, 2 Audis, and Chad's brand new Tesla Model S Plaid. My old Ford looked completely out of place among all that wealth and flash. As I parked and stepped out, Chad, my son-in-law of 2 years, came out of the house with a group of his wealthy friends. He took one look at my truck and burst out laughing. "Didn't know we were hosting the junkyard today," he shouted loudly, making absolutely sure everyone could hear him. His friends erupted in laughter. One guy actually pulled out his phone and took a photo of my truck. Chad walked over, drink in hand, and circled my Ford like he was examining roadkill. "Jesus, James. This thing still runs?" I'm honestly impressed it made it here without breaking down. I forced a smile, but inside, something twisted painfully. Emily came out behind him, and I could see her face flush bright red. Not anger at Chad. Embarrassment at me. At my truck. At her father showing up in something so old and worn. That hurt worse than anything Chad could have said. Inside the house, the party was in full swing. Everyone was dressed in designer clothes, Ralph Lauren, Gucci, brands I'd never heard of. They were talking about their businesses, their investments, their vacation homes in Aspen and the Hamptons. I sat quietly on the leather couch in my work jeans and flannel shirt, holding a cup of coffee, feeling completely out of place. That's when I overheard Chad talking to his friends in the kitchen. His voice carried through the house. "My wife's dad is still stuck in the Stone Age," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Guy drives a truck older than some of the people at this party. I keep telling Emily he should upgrade to something decent, but I guess old habits die hard. Some people just can't let go of the past." They all laughed. One of his friends said, "Maybe you should buy him a car for Christmas. Something from this century." More laughter. I sat there, listening to every word, my hands gripping the coffee cup so tightly I thought it might shatter. The party continued around me. People praised Chad's Tesla, his new Rolex, his tech startup that was supposedly valued at $5 million. Everyone talked about money, status, appearances, image. And there I was, the embarrassing old man with the rusty truck that was apparently a joke. But something shifted behind my calm expression. Something that had been sleeping for years suddenly woke up and stretched its claws. When dinner ended, I thanked Emily for having me and started heading toward the door. Chad followed me out with a bourbon in his hand, still riding high on his earlier jokes. "Hey, old-timer," he called out, his voice loud enough for everyone on the porch to hear. "Do me a favor and don't park too close to my Tesla next time. Don't want the rust spreading to actual valuable cars." A few people on the porch laughed nervously. Someone whispered, "That's kind of harsh." But nobody said anything to Chad directly. I turned around slowly, looked him directly in the eyes, smiled politely, and said, "I'll keep that in mind, son." Then I walked to my truck, got in, and drove away. But as I gripped that steering wheel, my knuckles white, my jaw clenched so tight it ached, something inside me hardened. I muttered under my breath, "He thinks that truck is all I am. He has no idea." And right then, a seed was planted. Not a seed of anger or revenge. A seed of revelation. A seed of inevitable, undeniable truth. The next morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. like I always did. I made coffee, fed my dog, and walked out to my property, 20 acres of land I'd bought 40 years ago when it was cheap farmland. Most people in town didn't know about my real garage. It was behind my main house, hidden by a line of oak trees, built with my own hands over the course of 3 years. A private, climate-controlled workshop with professional lighting and specialized equipment. I unlocked the heavy steel door and stepped inside. The space was immaculate. 3 beautifully restored vintage cars sat under protective covers, a 1967 Shelby GT 500 Mustang, a 1970 Dodge Charger R/T, and a 1955 Chevy Bel Air. Cars worth hundreds of thousands of dollars each. Cars that collectors would kill to own. And there, in the corner, was my rusty Ford. I walked over to it and lifted the hood. Beneath that worn, faded exterior was a custom-tuned 500 horsepower V8 engine that I'd built entirely with my own hands. Racing headers. Performance camshaft. Upgraded fuel injection. That junk truck could hit 60 miles per hour in under 4 seconds and outpace almost any modern sports car on the road. People saw rust and age. I saw raw power and precision engineering. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like and subscribe. What happens next will absolutely blow your mind. Most people in town didn't know what I really did for a living. After I retired from my factory job 20 years ago, I started a business that I kept deliberately quiet and private. Miller Customs. A custom vehicle restoration company that specialized in high-end vintage cars for wealthy collectors. My clients included private museums, professional race teams, and billionaire car enthusiasts from around the world. I'd restored vehicles that sold for over $1 million at auction. But I never advertised. I never bragged on social media. I never flashed wealth or wore expensive watches. I lived simply in my modest house because that's who I was at my core. My workshop was my sanctuary. My craft was my pride. My reputation in the collector car world was legendary, but I kept it quiet. And now? Now I had a new motivation. I wanted Chad to understand something fundamental about the world. Value isn't about appearances. It's about what's underneath. And my rusty truck was about to teach him that lesson in the most devastating way possible. 2 weeks later, my daughter called me. "Dad," she said, her voice cheerful and light, "Chad's turning 35 next weekend. We're throwing a big birthday party, lots of his business friends and investors. Can you come?" I smiled faintly. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetheart." After I hung up, I walked out to my garage and looked at my truck for a long moment. "Let's make an entrance this time," I whispered, running my hand along the rusty hood. I started planning. I was going to show up in that same rusty Ford. But this time, I wasn't going to hide what it really was. This time, Chad was going to learn exactly who he'd been mocking. I spent the next week preparing meticulously. I detailed the truck inside and out, kept the rusty exterior exactly as it was, weathered and worn, but I tuned the engine to absolute perfection. Every component was flawless. I cleaned every inch of the interior. I checked the transmission, the brakes, the suspension. Everything was race-ready. Then I did something small but deeply meaningful. I attached a sticker to the back bumper. It said in bold letters, "Built, not bought." That sticker represented everything I believed in. It represented every hour I'd spent in garages building things with my own hands. It represented a lifetime of craftsmanship that people like Chad couldn't understand because they'd never actually built anything themselves. They just bought things and called it success. On the morning of Chad's party, I stopped at a gas station to fill up. A young man at the pump next to me noticed my truck and walked over. "Cool old Ford, sir," he said with genuine appreciation in his voice. "My granddad had one just like it." He loved that thing more than anything. Used to take me for rides when I was a kid. I grinned, feeling warmth spread through my chest. They don't make them like this anymore, I said. These trucks were built to last forever if you take care of them properly. The young man nodded enthusiastically. That's what Granddad always said. He'd say modern cars are just computers on wheels. These old trucks? They've got soul. That simple conversation reminded me why I loved what I did. Real appreciation. Real respect. Not for flash or status or image, but for genuine craftsmanship and history. That young man understood something that Chad never would. He understood that value goes deeper than paint and chrome. I drove up Chad's circular driveway later that afternoon. The mansion was absolutely packed with guests. Sleek, expensive cars lined every available space, Maseratis, Lamborghinis, Range Rovers, all shining under the sun. And there I was, pulling up in my rusty Ford that looked like it had been dragged through a junkyard. People turned to stare. Some smirked. Some whispered to each other and pointed. I could see them judging me, dismissing me, writing me off as the poor old man who couldn't afford better. Chad came out of the house with a martini in his hand, surrounded by his wealthy friends, and when he saw my truck, he actually laughed so loud it echoed across the driveway. You really brought that heap here again? He said, shaking his head in mock disbelief. James, seriously, I could lend you money for a decent car if you need it. You don't have to embarrass yourself like this. I stepped out calmly, closed the door with a satisfying thunk, and said, this truck is exactly where it needs to be, Chad. Thought it deserved to be seen by people who might actually appreciate what it represents. The tone in my voice made him pause for just a second, but then he laughed it off and turned away. The party was elaborate and expensive. Chad was in his element, showing off, telling exaggerated stories about his business success, bragging about his investments in cryptocurrency and tech startups. He kept mentioning his net worth like it was a sports score. That's when an older gentleman in an expensive suit approached me. He looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place him immediately. Excuse me, he said politely, extending his hand. Are you James Miller? The James Miller who runs Miller Customs? I smiled modestly, shaking his hand. I used to do some restoration work, yes. Not as much these days. His eyes absolutely lit up. Used to. Sir, you're a legend in the collector car community. I'm Mr. Douglas. I've been trying to get in touch with you for months. Your restorations are museum quality. I saw your Shelby at Pebble Beach last year, absolutely breathtaking. Chad's ears perked up across the patio. He turned to look at us, his expression shifting from amusement to confusion. Whispers started rippling through the crowd. People were beginning to realize something significant was happening. Chad walked over quickly, his expression now a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Wait, you do what exactly? He asked, trying to sound casual but clearly rattled. You fix old cars for hobby money? I shrugged calmly. Sometimes. Depends on the car and who's buying. The air in the patio changed dramatically. Some guests exchanged knowing looks. A few of them clearly knew exactly who I was. Mr. Douglas continued enthusiastically, oblivious to Chad's discomfort. Hobby money? James, your Shelby restoration last year was the talk of the entire Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance. That car sold for $1.3 million at auction. You're not a hobbyist, you're a master craftsman. You could have heard a pin drop on that patio. Chad's face went from smug confidence to confusion to something approaching genuine fear. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Chad tried desperately to recover his composure and regain control of the situation by doubling down on his arrogance. He laughed loudly, but it sounded forced now, strained. All right, James, he said with exaggerated confidence, if you're such a master with that old truck, let's see what it can actually do. I bet my Tesla can smoke it in a drag race. Easy money. The entire patio went absolutely silent. Everyone turned to look at us. This was a challenge. A public challenge. I looked at Chad carefully, studying his face, seeing the desperation behind his bravado. "You sure you want that bet, son?" I asked quietly. He nodded, grinning like he'd already won. "Absolutely. Let's settle this right now. My car against your junk." I smiled. A calm, knowing smile. "All right then. Let's go." The crowd erupted in excited whispers. Everyone pulled out their phones. This was about to be filmed from every angle. We walked outside, and the entire party followed like we were gladiators heading into an arena. Chad's private driveway was long and perfectly straight, about a quarter-mile of smooth pavement. Perfect for a short drag race. He pulled his Tesla Model S Plaid to the starting line, its sleek black body gleaming in the afternoon sun. I pulled my rusty Ford next to it. The contrast was almost comical. His shiny, cutting-edge electric car that cost over $100,000 next to my decades-old truck that looked like it belonged in a scrapyard. People gathered on both sides of the driveway, phones out, recording, chattering excitedly. Chad revved his Tesla's motor, that characteristic electric hum filling the air, accompanied by his confident smirk. I just sat there calmly, hands relaxed on the wheel, breathing steadily. Someone in the crowd, one of Chad's friends, started counting down. 3, 2, 1. Go! Chad slammed his foot down. His Tesla shot forward with that instant electric torque, launching like a rocket. The crowd gasped. But I'd been waiting for this exact moment for 2 weeks. I hit the gas pedal, and my truck exploded with a thunderous, earth-shaking roar. The custom V8 engine I'd built unleashed every single one of its 500 horses. The rear tires screamed, smoking against the pavement. Within 2 seconds, I'd caught up to him. Within 3 seconds, I'd passed him. The crowd erupted in screams, shouts, absolute chaos. By the time we reached the end of the driveway, I was 4 car lengths ahead. It wasn't even close. I pulled to a stop, stepped out of my truck, dusted off my hands casually, and walked back toward the absolutely stunned crowd. Chad sat in his Tesla, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, his face completely drained of color. People were shouting, laughing, taking photos and videos. Someone yelled, "That's not a normal truck. What the hell is under that hood?" Another person shouted, "He just destroyed a Plaid." I walked over to where Chad was still sitting frozen and said calmly, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Guess it's not what's on the outside that counts, is it, son?" The crowd roared with approval, clapping, whistling. Chad finally got out of his car, visibly shaken, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. He looked like he'd just witnessed something impossible. Later that evening, after the shock had worn off slightly, Chad approached me in the garage where I was wiping down my truck. His arrogance was completely gone, replaced by genuine confusion and something like fear. What the hell did you do to that thing?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked at him and smiled calmly. "Let's just say that truck has been places your Tesla couldn't survive, Chad. It's been to racetracks across 3 states. It's been through dirt roads, mountain passes, desert highways. It's got a custom-built engine I designed and assembled myself over the course of 8 months. But you only saw the rust. You only saw the surface." Chad's face went from confusion to something like shame. He was beginning to understand that he'd been mocking something he didn't comprehend at all. That's when a man in an expensive 3-piece suit approached me, extending his hand warmly. I recognized him immediately, Mr. Bennett, one of the wealthiest car collectors in the entire state. "James Miller," he said warmly, his voice carrying across the garage. "I've been hoping to run into you for months. I wanted to publicly thank you." He turned to address the crowd that had gathered. "This man right here restored a 1967 Shelby GT 500 for me last year. That car sold at the Pebble Beach auction for $1.2 million. James is a legend in the collector car community. His craftsmanship is unmatched. Museums hire him. Race teams consult with him. He's the best in the world at what he does." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Chad's jaw literally dropped open. His eyes went wide with shock. All the color drained from his face completely. Everyone was staring at me now, not with pity or mockery, but with genuine respect and awe. The rusty truck suddenly made perfect sense to everyone. This wasn't a poor old man who couldn't afford better. This was a master craftsman who chose authenticity over flash. My daughter, Emily, pushed through the crowd with tears streaming down her face. "Dad," she said, her voice breaking with emotion, "I didn't know. All these years, I thought you just lived simply because you couldn't afford anything else. I didn't realize you were building all of this. I didn't realize you were this successful. Why didn't you tell me?" I put my hand gently on her shoulder. "Sweetheart, I didn't need people to know. I was happy doing what I loved. Still am. Money doesn't mean anything if you're not doing work that matters to you." She hugged me tightly, and I could feel her shoulders shaking. She was crying, not from sadness, but from the realization that her father wasn't the embarrassing old man she'd thought he was. Her father was a legend she'd never known. And she'd let her husband mock him publicly. The guilt on her face was visible. Mr. Bennett continued talking, asking if I'd consider consulting on his new vintage Ferrari collection. He mentioned a figure, $50,000 just for consultation. I declined politely. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm done proving myself to anyone. I do this work because I love it, not because I need validation or money." I glanced at Chad, who was standing nearby, his face still red with embarrassment and shock. The entire dynamic of the party had shifted completely. People who'd mocked me earlier were now asking for my business card. Chad stood alone near his Tesla, realizing that he'd publicly humiliated someone far more accomplished and respected than he'd ever be in his entire life. Later that evening, after most of the guests had left, Chad cornered me in the garage. His voice was tight with anger, shame, and desperation. "You made me look stupid in front of everyone. In front of my investors, my business partners, everyone who matters. You humiliated me." I looked him directly in the eyes and said something I'd been waiting to say for weeks. "Son, I didn't make you look stupid. Your pride did that. Your obsession with appearances did that. Your inability to see value beyond a price tag did that. I just drove my truck and told the truth. You did the rest to yourself." Chad opened his mouth to respond but nothing came out. He stood there, completely speechless, as I walked past him toward my truck. As I reached the door, I turned back and said one more thing: real wealth isn't about what you own, Chad. It's about what you can create with your own hands. Within 48 hours, photos and videos of the race had gone absolutely viral online. Someone had posted the footage with the caption, "Arrogant rich son-in-law gets destroyed by father-in-law's junk truck." It spread across social media like wildfire, millions of views in the first day alone. News outlets picked it up. Local TV stations interviewed witnesses. Headlines read, "Humble mechanic outsmarts arrogant son-in-law in epic showdown," and "Don't judge a truck by its rust, the viral story of James Miller." My phone started ringing off the hook. Requests for interviews from news channels. Requests for restoration work from collectors I'd never heard of. Documentary filmmakers wanted to tell my story. Miller Customs exploded in popularity overnight. My email inbox was flooded with thousands of requests from collectors, museums, and private buyers who wanted me to restore their vintage vehicles. People offered obscene amounts of money for my services. I was selective. I hired 3 young apprentices. Kids in their early 20s who genuinely loved cars and wanted to learn real craftsmanship. Not for the money. Not for the Instagram photos. But because they respected the art of building something meaningful with their own hands. My quiet workshop became a thriving business again, but this time completely on my own terms. I worked only on projects that excited me. I charged what I was worth. I built a legacy. Over the following months, something beautiful and unexpected happened. Emily started bringing her kids, my grandchildren, ages 7 and 9, to the workshop every weekend. They'd spend hours watching me work, asking questions, learning about engines and tools and the deep satisfaction of fixing things yourself instead of just replacing them. The rusty truck became their absolute favorite. They'd climb in the driver's seat and pretend to race Chad's Tesla, reenacting the famous showdown. They understood what their father still struggled to grasp: that truck represented history, family legacy, and craftsmanship that couldn't be bought in any store. It had to be earned through decades of dedication. About 6 months after the viral party, Chad showed up at my workshop one afternoon unannounced. He looked different. Humbler. Less polished. His expensive clothes were gone, replaced by jeans and a simple t-shirt. "James," he said quietly, his voice sincere, "I was a complete ass. I'm genuinely sorry. I judged you without knowing anything about you. I was wrong about everything. I've been thinking about what you said, about real wealth being what you create, not what you own. I want to understand that." I wiped my hands on a rag and looked at him carefully, searching his face for sincerity. "I found it. You weren't wrong to love nice things, Chad," I said. "You were wrong to look down on the people who actually build them. There's a massive difference between appreciating quality and worshipping status." He nodded, genuinely absorbing the lesson. Chad asked if he could invest in the workshop, help me expand into a larger facility. I smiled faintly. "You want to be part of this? Start with a wrench, not a checkbook. Come work with me. Learn what it actually takes to build something that lasts. Get your hands dirty." To my genuine surprise, Chad agreed without hesitation. Over the next year, he spent every weekend in the shop, learning to restore cars alongside my apprentices. He got grease permanently under his nails. He made countless mistakes. He learned humility through hard, honest work. He learned that perfection takes time and patience. And slowly, painfully, he began to understand what I'd been trying to teach him all along. He even started driving a used truck instead of his Tesla. He sold most of his expensive watches. He became a different person. 1 year after that viral party, I stood in front of my expanded workshop with my entire family. We'd moved to a larger facility and added a beautiful new sign above the garage. It read in bold letters, "Miller and Son Restorations." Chad stood next to me, genuinely proud, his hands calloused from real work. The rusty Ford was parked right out front, polished but unchanged, sitting exactly where it belonged. The late afternoon sun hit the hood just right, making it glow like copper. I looked at that old truck, the one that had been mocked and dismissed, the one that had proven everyone wrong, the one that had taught the most important lesson of all, and I muttered softly to myself, "Not bad for an old heap, huh?" Emily squeezed my hand. Chad smiled, his eyes meeting mine with real respect. My grandchildren climbed into the truck bed, laughing and pretending to race. And I realized something profound about life: real value doesn't need to be shiny or expensive or impressive. It just needs to be real. It just needs to be built with your own hands and your own heart.